What's up guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of Bonsai-U. This time around we're talking wire scarring and how to properly remove wire from your bonsai. Alright, so before we get started with this video, make sure to like and subscribe down below, hit that notification bell so you get notifications each time we post a new video. This really helps us out with the algorithm, and of course if you want to comment, that would be great as well. Now, like I said in the beginning, we're going to be talking about wire scars on your trees and how to properly remove wire, and a lot of this is actually dependent on the species that you're working with. Now, to start this discussion off, what we're going to do is divide bonsai up into two broad categories. First off, we've got broadleaf bonsai on one side, and we've got coniferous bonsai on the other side. So let's take a look at each of these categories and how they relate to wire scarring and removing wire as well. All right, so first off here, let's take a look at coniferous bonsai. These would be things like junipers, pines, hinoki cypress, spruces, things along those lines. Now, typically when we're applying wire to coniferous species, we're going to be applying annealed copper wire. This is soft copper wire that actually work hardens as we apply it. And the beautiful thing about working with copper wire is that you can use relatively small gauge wire to accomplish a lot of holding power within the tree. And this is really important when you're dealing with fine branch ramification on certain conifers, like the Scots pine that's right beside me here. I wouldn't want to use something like aluminum wire to do a lot of detail work on a tree like this, because you're going to have to use quite thick wire to hold those branches into place. So using copper wire is a really good option for coniferous material. Now, in terms of the length of time that we're going to be leaving wire on coniferous material, that's all dependent on the particular tree that you're working with. What I mean by that is we want to allow the wire to bite in slightly over a certain period of time. So some species are going to bite in more quickly than others. Younger trees, because they grow more quickly, are going to bite in faster than older trees. But we do want a little bit of biting in on most of our conifers. Now, the reason that we want that biting in, of course, is that it creates a little bit of scar tissue, which allows those branches, once the wire is removed, to remain in place. There is a fine line, however, between creating a little bit of scar tissue with biting in and leaving that wire for too long and actually damaging the branch. So I'm going to show you a close-up of some of the trees that we have here to give you an understanding of what is enough biting in, what's not enough biting in, and what's too much biting in. So this tree right here, this is a ponderosa pine. This is a perfect example of a tree that had wire applied to it, but it hasn't yet bitten in enough to create the scar tissue and hold the branch in place. So if I were to cut the wire off on this tree right now, the branch would likely spring back up to its original position, which of course we don't want. So with ponderosas, particularly older examples like this guy that are collected, we'll leave the wire on anywhere from 2 to 4 growing seasons, maybe even longer. Again, we're looking for that biting in just slightly to create the scar tissue. This tree right here, on the other hand, is a perfect example of allowing the wire to bite into just the right amount to create that scar tissue and hold the branches in place. This is an Itoigawa Shinpaku that was imported from Japan to the United States several years ago. I actually applied this wire to this tree about 4 or 5 growing seasons ago, and it's just now starting to bite in. So again, you're going to see biting in with certain species much faster than with other species. Now, the wire on this tree is about ready to come off, so we're going to be removing this wire coming up here shortly as we move into the fall season. So what does it look like when you've left the wire on for too long on a piece of coniferous material? Well, this little Japanese black pine right here is a perfect example of the wire having been embedded too much into the branch and actually potentially causing damage to that branch. Now, at this stage, we're going to have to go through and of course remove that wire. The nice thing again with coniferous material is that they do retain their leaves all winter long, so that wire scarring will be hidden by the foliage, but it's a little bit too deep and too deeply embedded into the branch. And if we were to leave this wire on any longer, the branch would likely heal up and around that wire, and it would be permanently embedded in that branch. And over time, that could slowly choke out that branch and kill it off. So this is why you want to keep on top of removing the wire at exactly the right time, again, for that holding power, but not to damage the branch and potentially kill it in the long run. So here you can see that the wire is actually too deeply embedded in the branch, and the tissue of the branch is actually starting to swell up and around that wire, which is not good. So in order to remove this wire, what I typically do is take my snub-nosed wire cutters here. I either come a little further out on the branch or further back in on the branch where the wire is not embedded into that branch, and I bite or cut that wire in that location and then start to peel that wire away. Now you can see here, I've got it pushed off to the side. Now I can push it underneath, and as I bring it up and around, we can then take it out of that groove. Now I recommend that you don't just take this and continue to unwind it, that you actually cut it into smaller pieces. It tends to be a little bit safer to remove if you do that. So we'll cut this down here, and then this should pop out nice and easily there. So if, for instance, we had actually exposed the live tissue underneath the wire here and actually damaged the branch, what I would do is go back through and put cut paste on this. But in the case of this particular branch, no live tissue was exposed, so we don't need to add cut paste over the wire scars. All right, this brings us to the second big category in bonsai, and those are our broadleaf species. These could be things like deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the winter and broadleaf evergreen trees that hold their leaves all winter long. Now, in dealing with something like a deciduous tree, like a maple, for example, which is what I have right beside me here, these trees, because they lose their leaves in the winter, we want to avoid having any wire scarring on them at all. If you leave the wire on too long, like we do with conifers to get a little bit of bite and create some scar tissue, if you do that with a deciduous tree like this, you're always going to be able to see that wire scarring. It's never really going to heal over very well, and it's going to ruin that winter silhouette look. Now, when you're dealing with broadleaf evergreen trees, say an oleaster, Elaeagnus, silverberry, for example, those trees do retain their leaves all winter long. However, sometimes we do like to display those with no leaves in the winter by actually defoliating those trees once they go dormant to show off that beautiful soft ramification that we've been working on year after year after year during the growing season. So even with the broadleaf evergreen trees, I would recommend not allowing the wire to bite in at all with those trees. It's really never going to heal over, and again, you're going to see it very obviously in the winter, particularly if you're removing those leaves for a winter silhouette show, for example. Now, with all that said about our broadleaf species, sometimes accidents do happen and we do end up leaving wire on too long on those trees. This tree right beside me here is a Pseudocydonia, or Chinese quince, and this is a perfect example of a tree that was wired earlier this summer. That wire was left on slightly too long and it caused wire scarring and damage to the branches. In the case of this particular tree, our best option is to actually cut back behind or beyond that wire scarring and start over with new branching. Sometimes this happens, mistakes do happen, even here at a professional nursery like Eisei-en. We've got so many things going on, so many trees as well, that every once in a while, a tree sort of slips through the cracks. So with a plant like this, again, this is what you want to avoid. This is biting in way too much, of course, and we're gonna have to start those branches all over again. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with broadleaf trees, again, whether that be deciduous or broadleaf evergreen, is that we typically apply aluminum or aluminium wire to these guys. The reason that we do that is because the bark on most of these species tends to be a bit softer and more easily damageable than the bark on coniferous material. So applying soft aluminum wire will help you avoid damaging the bark any further. In addition to that, aluminum tends to be much cheaper than copper wire, and the wire that we're applying to these guys will be removed very quickly. So sometimes within a month to 2 months after application. So applying copper wire to something like this could be very expensive, which is why, again, we're using aluminum for most of our broadleaf evergreen and deciduous trees. Okay, so to sum this up, just to give you guys a couple of key points here at the very end, with your coniferous material, make sure that you're leaving that wire on long enough to bite in just a little bit to create that scar tissue and allow for better holding power. With your broadleaf evergreen and deciduous trees, keep on top of those guys, make sure that you don't see any biting in, and remove that wire before any scarring can occur to the branches. Again, this is gonna be a little bit of a pain, but it's just part of the process in dealing with those particular species. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Bonsai-U. If you like what we do here, make sure again to like and subscribe. And if you really want to support us, you can click on that link in the description down below. It'll bounce you over to my website. You can make a monetary donation to help Bonsai-U going forward. Once again, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode. And until next time, take care.